Hey everyone, before we go any further, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. What you are about to hear is one of the most heartbreaking and devastating mountaineering disasters ever recorded in Soviet history. It is a story of courage, ambition, sisterhood, and the merciless, unforgiving power of nature. 8 women, 1 mountain, 0 survivors. This is the tragedy of Lenin Peak, 1974. Mountains do not discriminate. They do not care about your gender, your experience, your determination, or your dreams. They simply exist, ancient, indifferent, and utterly unforgiving of human error. In August 1974, Lenin Peak, a mountain that had not claimed a single life in 45 years of climbing, suddenly turned into a killer. And it took 8 brave women with it. This was not just an accident. It was a perfect storm of bad weather, poor decisions, tragic timing, and circumstances that make you question everything about human ambition. What drove these women to push forward when warning signs appeared? Why did they refuse help from male climbers? And what really happened during those final terrifying hours on the summit? Welcome to one of mountaineering's darkest chapters. To understand this tragedy, you need to know the world these women lived in. The year was 1974. The Soviet Union was in the middle of a social revolution. Since the 1930s, Soviet propaganda had been flooding the country with images of powerful, capable women factory workers operating heavy machinery, scientists in laboratories, pilots soaring through clouds, and high-ranking government officials making critical decisions. Women were not just participating in society. They were leading it. And sports, including the dangerous world of high-altitude mountaineering, were no exception. But let us be honest. While Soviet culture celebrated female achievement, the reality of high-altitude climbing remained overwhelmingly male-dominated. Women who conquered peaks above 7,000 meters were rare. Those who did earned respect, but they also faced constant skepticism. Could women really handle the extreme physical demands? Could they make sound decisions under the pressure of life-and-death situations? Elvira Shatayeva was about to answer those questions. Unfortunately, the mountain would have the final say. Elvira Shatayeva was not some reckless amateur chasing fame. She was the real deal. At 35 years old, she had already established herself as one of the Soviet Union's most accomplished female mountaineers. Born in Moscow in 1938, she graduated from the prestigious Moscow Academic Art School before becoming a sports committee instructor with the Spartak Sports Society. Her introduction to mountaineering came in 1962, courtesy of her husband, Vladimir Shatayeva, himself a legendary climber. But Elvira did not need her husband's reputation to make a name for herself. She earned the title Master of Sport in 1970. And just 1 year later, she became only the 3rd woman ever to summit Communism Peak, now known as Ismail Samani Peak, via the incredibly difficult Razdolnaya Ridge. That same year, she led the first all-female ascent of Peak Korzenievskaya. But Elvira was not satisfied with individual achievements. She had a vision. Proof that women could not only climb but could organize, lead, and complete major expeditions entirely on their own terms. Her next target was Lenin Peak, standing at 7,134 meters, 23,406 feet. Here is where Elvira's story becomes fascinating, and in retrospect, deeply concerning. She did not just want to climb Lenin Peak with an all-female team. She wanted to prove that women could do it completely independently, without any male assistance whatsoever. In her own words, she explained, "Overcoming the physical barrier is one of the main goals of our experimental ascent." The remarks of skeptics that women cannot survive a single day without an incident occurring sounded like a warning. When male climbers offered to help, she refused. When Vladimir Kavienko, an experienced climber, suggested joining forces, she shot back, "You think we're just playing around and you're the real thing? We're not doing it for prizes. It might sometimes make sense to deceive others, but why deceive ourselves?" She was brutally honest about her own doubts. Keep in mind that it's the women themselves who are the greatest skeptics here. Do you understand? Even I don't fully believe in myself, though I have climbed Peak Korzenievskaya and others. I argue with myself. Will I climb Lenin Peak to prove my own arguments? And here you are, a gentleman, offering to take me by the hand. This was not just a climb. It was a statement, a proof of concept. And that pressure to prove something to the world, to the skeptics, and perhaps most importantly to herself, would prove fatal. Here is the cruel twist of fate that makes the story so heartbreaking. Lenin Peak was considered one of the safest mountains in the region. For 45 years after its first ascent, not a single climber had died on it. It had a reputation as a beginner's peak for high-altitude climbing, challenging enough to be respectable, but safe enough that experienced climbers recommended it for building confidence. In fact, some people suggested Elvira choose a more dangerous summit. They thought she was being too cautious, but she rejected those suggestions, saying she was not ready to take unnecessary risks. Lenin Peak had never held any surprises, except this time it did. The year 1974 was different. The mountain slopes were much snowier than usual. The weather was unpredictable and hostile. On July 25th, an avalanche killed John Gary Ullin, a capable American climber, the mountain's first victim in nearly half a century. Then in early August, the mountain claimed another life. Eva Eisenschmidt, a Swiss woman. 2 deaths on a mountain that had never killed anyone before, and Elvira's team was planning their summit push for early August. On July 10, 1974, Elvira's team gathered in the city of Osh, in modern-day Kyrgyzstan. The group consisted of 8 women. Elvira Shatayeva was the leader. The others were Galina Rozentseva, Ilsiar Mukhamedova, Nina Vasilieva, Valentina Fateva, Irina Lubimova, Galina Parakodyuk, Tatiana Bardasheva, and Ludmila Mansharova. Some sources vary slightly on the exact names, but we know that 8 women perished. Elvira knew some of them personally from previous ascents. With others, she had only exchanged letters. But they shared something powerful, a determination to prove themselves. Male climbers who observed them at base camp reported that the women lived like a well-trained ship's crew. They maintained strict discipline, trained rigorously, and completed 2 preliminary hikes to acclimatize to the altitude. They were dedicated, hardworking, supportive of each other, and laser-focused on their objective. They were also wary of men who tried to help. They set up their tents at a distance from the main camp and were selective about who they allowed into their space. This was their expedition, their proof, their moment. Elvira's husband, Vladimir Shatayev, was present at base camp and watched his wife and her team prepare. Before he had to leave, he asked Elvira not to overexert herself and to turn back if anything went wrong. She promised she would. She did not keep that promise. By early August, Elvira's team was ready. They started their climb on schedule, leaving base camp and heading toward the peak. On August 2nd, Elvira sent a radio message to base camp that radiated confidence. About 1 hour left before we reach the ridge. Everything is okay. The weather is good, the wind is mild, and the way is easy. Everyone is feeling well. So far, everything is so good that we're even disappointed in the route. Disappointed in the route. Think about that phrase. They had expected Lenin Peak to challenge them, to test them, to justify their preparation and determination. Instead, it seemed almost easy. But here is what Elvira did not know. At that same moment, several male teams were on the ascent route. Vitaly Abalakov, a legendary Soviet climber back at base camp, had asked those teams to wait a little so they could support the female group if needed. Elvira's team refused the assistance. They felt that accepting help would diminish the significance of their achievement. Instead, they decided to rest briefly, postponing their climb to let the male teams get ahead and get off their tail. Independence, the need to prove themselves, these qualities had driven them this far, but they would also contribute to their deaths. On August 3rd at 8 a.m., Elvira informed base camp that they planned to approach the summit the next day. Abalakov replied with a positive weather forecast. The women were determined. Everything seemed aligned. But the mountain had other plans. On August 4th at around 5 p.m., Elvira reported over the radio. The weather is getting worse. It's snowing. That's good. It will cover the tracks so that no one accuses us of following tracks. Even as conditions deteriorated, Elvira was thinking about perception, about proving they had not simply followed in other climbers' footsteps, about maintaining the purity of their achievement. At that point, one of the male teams was close to where the women were positioned. They asked base camp about further directions and were told that Shatayeva's group was doing fine and that they could descend. The rest of the story is known only through radio communications. Chilling, fragmented transmissions that would later be analyzed, debated, and mourned. On August 5th, the women successfully reached the summit. At 5 p.m., Elvira reported, "We're on the summit." Base camp replied with congratulations and wishes for a successful descent. The journey seemed almost over. They had done it. 8 women had conquered Lenin Peak entirely on their own terms. But already in the following communication, Elvira revealed worrying news. Visibility is poor, 20 to 30 meters. We're unsure of the direction of the descent. We've decided to put up tents. Set them up in tandem, hoping to discern the descent path once the weather improves. Base camp agreed. If there is zero visibility, it is best to wait it out and perhaps even spend the night on the summit if possible. Elvira replied, "The conditions are bearable, though the weather isn't kind. Visibility is 0. It's always windy here, just as we were told. Don't think we'll freeze. Hopefully the night won't be too challenging. We're feeling well. It is indeed cold and unpleasant at the summit." Base camp responded, "It's possible that the wind will continue unabated, might even grow stronger. Try to wake up early and find the descent path. And if possible, start the descent immediately. Good night and good luck." Those last words, "good luck," would haunt everyone who read them later. August 6th, 10 a.m. Elvira radioed, "The weather hasn't changed at all. There's no visibility. We got up at 7 a.m. and have been monitoring the weather constantly, waiting for a glimpse of anything through the fog to find our way down. It's 10 o'clock now and there is nothing. No improvement. Visibility is still poor, about 20 meters. What will the base camp recommend?" Abalikov responded, "Let's talk at 1 p.m. Have a snack in the meantime." 1 p.m. Elvira. "No change. Nothing's cleared up. The wind has suddenly started growing stronger. Visibility is still poor and we don't know which direction to go. We're ready to move out at any moment, but time has passed. We're making lunch now. We're planning to eat and then pack up to be ready to leave in 10 to 15 minutes tops. Please inform us if there's anyone going in our direction." Base camp reported, "The worsening weather is noticeable on the ridge and below. Individual climbers are going up today, but it looks like reaching the summit wouldn't be possible. If anyone has left their bivouac shelters, they will likely return because of the weather. So, which direction do we go in?" Abalikov replied, "If facing the obelisk, face the obelisk and start descending to your left. It's very difficult to give directions on the radio. There is no discernible descent there anyway. It's more like intermediate fields. You can descend if there are tracks from previous groups. If these are absent and there is zero visibility, then it's better to wait until the weather improves. The descent path in the direction of Razdolnaya Peak isn't well defined. With bad weather and visibility, it's best to stay put. Elvira. We'll discuss it and come to a decision." 5 p.m. Elvira. "No improvement in the weather. It's only getting worse and worse. We're fed up with being here. So cold. We would like to leave the summit. We've already lost all hope of any improvement in visibility. We just want to start the descent if possible. The wind is very, very strong. Before descending, we'll listen to you. What do you think of our plan? And now, please invite a doctor to the comms. We have a question. We need his consultation." Base camp. "What's the matter? What sort of consultation do you need?" Elvira. "One of our teammates is sick for about a day. She's been throwing up after meals. We suspect it might be her liver." The doctor, listening in, said, "I think it's the beginning of pneumonia. The group should descend immediately." Abalikov's voice was sharp. "Urgent. I'm issuing a reprimand for not reporting the sickness of a teammate sooner. You will comply with the doctor's orders. Give her an injection and immediately start your descent via the Lipkin route." "Understood." Elvira. "Okay. We will do the injections, pack our tents, and start descending in 15 minutes. As far as the reprimand is concerned, I'd prefer to receive it at base, not at the summit." Those were Elvira's final words, showing a trace of her characteristic spirit. A small defiance even in the face of disaster. She would accept criticism, but on her terms, at base camp, after they had safely descended. They never made it to base camp. The morning of August 7th brought catastrophic news. At 11 a.m., Shatayeva transmitted, "Yesterday at 11 p.m., Irina Lubimova tragically died during the descent." 15 minutes after receiving this message, a team of Soviet mountaineers left base camp to help the stranded group. French, British, and Austrian teams also set out. They managed to contact Japanese mountaineers who were close to the summit, no more than 400 yards away from Shatayeva's group. All of them set out to help, but a snowstorm blocked all paths. Finding and saving the female climbers became an impossible mission. It was said that an earthquake was also registered around that time, the third one that month. 2 p.m. Shatayeva to base camp. We've got 2 dead Vasileva and Fate Eva. Belongings have been blown away. 3 sleeping bags left for 5 people. We are very cold. 4 of us have extremely frostbitten hands. Base camp. Continue the descent. Keep your courage. If you cannot walk, try to move around. Always keep yourselves in motion. Please contact us every hour if possible. 3:15 p.m. We're very cold. We cannot dig ourselves in. Nothing to dig with. Backpacks have been blown away. 5 p.m. base camp to another group. The Japanese found nothing on the ridge. Got frostbitten from the strong wind. No result. 7 p.m. base camp to another group. The tragedy on the summit is coming to an end. They probably won't last long. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, we will inform you of the ensuing actions. You'll probably have to climb up. Think about that phrase. The tragedy on the summit is coming to an end. Not we're working to save them. Not help is on the way. The tragedy is coming to an end because they would all be dead. 8 p.m. base camp to Shatayeva's team. Dig in. Keep yourselves warm. Help will come tomorrow. Hold out till the morning. But help was not coming and they knew it. 9:12 p.m. communications were now being made by Galina Parakodiuk. The base camp could hear her begin the broadcast. But then there was silence. After a while, she started crying. The words were difficult to make out. There's 2 of us left. We can't go on anymore. In 15 to 20 minutes, we'll be dead. Twice more. Base camp noticed the sound of the radio button being pressed, futile attempts to communicate. Yet only the howling of the wind could be heard. Then silence. Complete, final silence. It is hard to imagine the nightmare that these women lived through. Words simply fail to describe it. But let us piece together what happened. After Shatayeva's group reached the peak, weather conditions worsened dramatically. The women decided to make camp for the night on the summit. Spending the night on a peak with strong winds and low temperatures is very dangerous, but attempting a descent in zero visibility is even worse. Evidently, base camp did not consider the situation to be dire. After all, Shatayeva was an experienced mountaineer and seemed to have everything under control. So she was given the right to choose a course of action, and her choice was supported. Then again, maybe the team did not actually have a choice. The next morning on August 6th, the weather became so bad that not a single team would set out toward the summit. The tracks of previous climbers had been completely covered by snow, but they could not stay on the summit much longer, especially after it turned out that one of the teammates was vomiting after every meal. Shatayeva was reprimanded for not reporting it sooner. But her husband Vladimir later wrote in his book that Elvira likely considered the vomiting to be a symptom of mountain sickness, which, though unpleasant, was only to be expected. Yet it was at this point that Vitaly Abalakov decided to issue the reprimand. Being an experienced climber, perhaps he understood better than anyone else the threat that loomed over the women and simply could not keep his temper. The weather was merciless. At around 2 a.m. on August 7th, a snowstorm hit the peak. That night, Irina Lubimova died. At 7 p.m., base camp sent that chilling message. The tragedy on the summit is coming to an end. What did that mean? Mountaineers were used to hardships and were realistic about their assessment of the situation. The women did not have a chance. And indeed, at 9:12 p.m., base camp received the last message from the team. It was over. Once the snowstorm subsided, American and Japanese mountaineers were the first to reach the scene of the tragedy. They made a map that could later be used to find and identify the bodies. The climbers reported finding 7 bodies and said that the 8th woman was missing. For a short while, this gave a glimmer of hope that she might be alive, though everyone understood how unlikely that would be. A member of the Japanese team that mapped the area and put up flags to mark the bodies recounted a chilling incident upon his return to base camp. After we went back to the tent, we started getting auditory hallucinations. Jack and I would hear a voice outside. It sounded like the pleading of a young woman. But every time we left the tent to take a look, we would hear only the creaking of ropes under the weight of the snow. What could that have been? The minds of men who had witnessed unspeakable tragedy. searching for meaning in the wind, or something else, something we cannot explain. The Soviet search team was led by Elvira's husband, Vladimir Shatayeva, who had left the Pamir Mountains a few days earlier. He found out about the tragedy only upon his return. When he arrived at the foot of the mountain, he noticed that everyone was mourning. Soon thereafter, he heard the horrible news. Shatayeva's whole group had perished. In spite of the hard blow that this news must have been, Vladimir found in himself the strength to head the search team and was the first to start the ascent. In his book, he assiduously describes every detail, every step, every thought, how he fought the hope of seeing his wife alive, how he tried to accept the facts, ascending the peak not for conquest but to identify the bodies of 8 women. When Vladimir Shatayeva reached the summit, before him opened a view that he would never forget. Under a dazzling blue sky, there was a majestic snowy slope on which he could see small dark lines, one under another. This was the women's team. Elvira lay closest to the descent path. Feeling weak in his legs, Vladimir approached the body and began the formal identification procedure. He got out his recorder, turned it on, and started speaking. Elvira Shatayeva. He paused, filling his lungs with air, and continued. Blue anorak, Vera's shoes, crampons on the feet, small round mirror broken. He described the gruesome image in detail, and 7 more similar descriptions awaited him. Vladimir and his group found all 8 victims. The 8th woman, Nina Vasilieva, lay in a snow cave under the body of Valentina Fateva, and the Japanese team had simply failed to notice her. The climbers dug 2 graves in the snow. They buried Nina Vasilieva, Valentina Fateva, and Irina Lubimova in the first grave. Galina Perekodiuk, Tatiana Bardasheva, and Ludmila Mancharova were placed in the second grave. Elvira Shatayeva and Ilsiar Mukhamedova were also laid in that second grave. They had planned to leave the bodies there permanently. Mountaineers seldom bring back the bodies of their fallen comrades, mostly due to the great risk. Any ascent to the peak is dangerous, and not many would be willing to risk it for the sake of the dead. However, this unspoken law was soon broken for Shatayeva's group. The relatives of the victims had pleaded for their bodies to be returned, and even their fellow climbers felt bad about leaving 8 young women on the mountain forever. Vladimir Shatayeva felt that a return mission was necessary. This is why a year later he requested permission to bring the bodies of Shatayeva's group back from the mountain. He admitted to being afraid that his motives would be misunderstood, that people would think this was his way of coping with his own grief. But the Soviet Council on Sports understood him correctly and granted him permission to embark on this risky endeavor. To Shatayeva's surprise, mountaineers across the whole country, from beginners to professionals, wanted to take part in the mission. All of them were prepared to ascend the peak of their own free will. At the last moment, Vladimir made an unexpected decision and included 2 women in his team, Anna Aniova and Ria Sabarova, inspired by what they had written in their letters to him. We firmly believe that mountaineering is not only about physical strength. The mission lasted 14 days and was a success. The women were buried at the foot of Lenin Peak in the Achiktash field, near the base camp. In his speech during the burial ceremony, Vladimir Shatayeva said, "Our mountaineers were gentle and courageous women. They conquered peaks. Humans will always put themselves to the test, including through mountains. It will never end, not for men, not for women. I wanted to bury Elvira here in this land at the foot of the mountains. As long as the Pamirs stand, people will always be here. The Pamirs will help keep the memory of them forever." The tragedy on Lenin Peak became one of the most harrowing incidents in the history of mountaineering. A sudden and heartbreaking end to the lives of 8 young women who had dared to prove that gender was no barrier to achievement. Vladimir Shatayeva continued his mountaineering career after his wife's death. He conquered Everest in 1995. He is now in his 80s and married a second time. As recently as 2016, he ascended Mount Kilimanjaro. One can only imagine how many peaks Elvira could have conquered. But as they say, mountains either let you come to them, or they don't. And sometimes they take climbers with them forever. Even though the cause of the group's death seems obvious, a combination of extreme weather, zero visibility, illness, and the terrible decision to wait on the summit, there are rumors in mountaineering circles that Elvira never told the whole truth. Some whisper that perhaps some of the women got sick even before they reached the summit and that they continued their hike in spite of that. However, there is little proof for this version, which sounds more like a conspiracy theory. it is overwhelmingly likely that it was the weather that played the fatal role in their demise. What do we take from this story? Was it the refusal to accept help that doomed them? The pressure to prove themselves? The unprecedented weather? The illness of team members? The delayed reporting of symptoms? Or was it simply the terrible, random cruelty of nature? A mountain that had never killed before suddenly claiming 8 lives in one catastrophic event? The truth is, we will never know all the answers. We only have the radio transmissions, the testimonies of those who tried to help, and the final heartbreaking recordings of women who knew they were dying. 8 women, 1 mountain, 0 survivors. But also courage, determination, sisterhood, and the eternal human drive to push beyond limits, to prove what is possible, to leave a mark on the world. Elvira Shatayeva and her team did not die in vain. Their story reminds us of the price of ambition, the importance of knowing when to turn back, and the fact that mountains demand respect above all else. They proved that women could organize, lead, and execute a major high-altitude expedition entirely independently. They reached the summit. They achieved their goal. They just never made it home. If the story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share the story of Elvira Shatayeva and her team with others. Remember, the mountain does not care about your ambition, your preparation, or your dreams. It only respects your decisions. Stay safe, know when to turn back, and never let pride override survival. Until next time.